Hey everyone, welcome to the Anexipod, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 33, recorded May 1st, 2018. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Director of Cloud Solutions at Anexinet. Here on the Anexipod, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we will be talking about the recent advancements in vSphere and vSAN 6.7, the VCDX certification, and more with the oft-imitated but never duplicated Rebecca Fitzhugh. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I'm also extremely impressed you nailed the last name first try.
It doesn't seem like it's that complicated. It's Fitzhugh.
I agree.
What's the normal variation you get on there?
You would be surprised. I mean, use your imagination. Like anything fits, and then anything after that. So I get Fitzpatrick, Fitzgerald, Fitzsimmons, or I get like Fitzhug or Fitzhuge a lot. I think it's a pretty simple last name, but I think people just see a lot of letters and like a Z in the middle of it and just freak out.
They're just like, oh God, I can't make it to the end. Fitz.
Yeah, exactly.
No, as someone with the last name Bellavance, I can certainly understand that. Most people get through the bell and then give up somewhere. I get Bellarance a lot, which makes no sense because there's definitely not an R in there. But, you do what you can.
Close enough. We know you're talking to us.
Yes, absolutely. So before we get into the topics, why don't you tell listeners a little about yourself and how you ended up in this crazy world of technology?
Sure thing. So I currently work at a vendor as a technical marketing engineer, which is kind of a fun and weird position in which I'm kind of act as a translator, if you will, where I get the opportunity to travel a lot internationally and domestically and speak to customers, prospects, and just sort of the general tech community and kind of hear what they're thinking and saying and talking about, and then translating that back to our product management and engineering teams at this company. So that's pretty fun. In addition to that, I blog, I podcast with V Brown Bag, and of course I'm speaking at different events and conferences. So you asked how I got started in tech. Is that what you asked as well?
Yeah.
Oof.
That's usually the origin stories are usually pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think mine's. I think it's a little interesting because I think it's a little bit unusual. It's definitely not. I'm definitely not the only person in the world with this career path, but I ended up in tech by effectively joining the military. So you take this lovely exam called the ASVAB, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, I think, is what it stands for.
Okay.
And I scored pretty well. And based off of my results, I was placed into a technical field. So I actually began my tech career at the age of 17 by enlisting in the Marine Corps.
Oh, wow. So thank you for your service. And so what did you end up doing in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so I kind of was in an unusual position because I was in the Marine Corps. They were starting to kind of change around job fields. So I ended up kind of doing a mishmash of various things, but kind of started doing some crypto intel. And then by the end of kind of my 5 years, I was ending up doing a lot of like network storage, VMware, that type of stuff, because I had to effectively administer all of the entire infrastructure in which the platform that I was actually doing my primary job was residing on.
Okay. And I imagine the security requirements and probably the robustness of the system needs to be pretty high.
Yes. It was really kind of fun, but also not fun every time we had to do any kind of security compliance. But we actually had this disk that was called Gold Disk because we're very creative and the disk was gold, that had just a ton of patching and basically quick fixes to harden your system. And if you just inserted the disk and said go, it would, no joke, completely lock down the system, disable the NIC, do everything, because the only way your box is ever truly secure is if it is literally a box with no network connectivity.
Say, the only way a box is ever secure is if you melt it down to slag, right?
Exactly. The gauze everything.
Yeah, there was I don't know, you saw the thing about no code that and it was who was that? That was
Kelsey Hightower.
Kelsey Hightower. That's right. Yeah. And he posted it on GitHub and it was no code and there was literally nothing in it. And he was like, this is the only way to be secure. All right.
I followed along with that. I loved all of the pools and additions to it. It was a pretty humorous project.
Yeah. I reading through the I guess the pull requests and the bug tracking was pretty hilarious. Yeah. All right. So after the Marine Corps, it looks like you got your VCDX at some point. And I have to admit that until recently, I didn't really know what that was or what it meant. But after hearing it described to me in detail, I got the sense that it's similar in nature to the CCIE, but for virtualization. Would you say that's accurate? And why did you decide to get such a demanding certification?
Yeah, I don't think it's exactly analogous to a CCIE, but it's not unlike it. Because with the VCDX program, you kind of have to start, at the bottom, with your VCP certification, which is the most common certification, and then you work your way up to the advanced professionals. And there's a lab-oriented certification you have to get. So that's kind of similar to CCIE. And then, of course, you have the test, right? That's very design related, but it's multiple choice, and that's the advanced professional level. And then you move to the VCDX. So it's kind of like a cross, if you will, between like CCIE and like CCDA, right? CCDA is I believe, the Cisco certified design architect or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So with the VCDX, you kind of go through and you write this, design, this enterprise level type design. So, and it's on all of the associated documentation that you would normally give to a customer. So things like your SOPs, your implementation plan, along with the actual design document. You submit that, they grade it, and then if it's good enough, then they will basically invite you to come and defend your design in front of a panel of other VCDXs, so in front of another group of experts. So it's kind of intimidating.
Yeah, no, that sounds scary.
And it is a technical certification, but at the same time, it's not. It's very architecturally focused, in which there are many kind of like non-technical businessy aspects, and also a lot of methodology applied to it.
Okay. Yeah, I find that the architecture stuff is uniquely challenging because you do have to take into consideration business requirements, and you can design the most interesting and elegant solution in the world, but if it doesn't meet business requirements, then it's really no good.
Exactly.
Wow. So that must have been a little scary, getting up in front of a panel of 3 people and sort of defending your design.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say scary, but it is definitely a level of intimidation that, like one of my panelists wrote the book on storage, and then I have to get up there and talk to him about storage when he wrote like a 1,400-page book about this. I'm like, I don't, what do I have to offer? I think so. You have that kind of this, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but you definitely kind of feel slightly less than a lot of the time. But you're in that room for a reason, right? You're there to prove that you are their peer. So you have to kind of take that mentality. So I just, tried to be relaxed and laugh and joke with them, because at the end of the day, they're people too.
Right. And I think that probably gives you a little edge too, just to, talk to them like normal human beings and not like gods that have come down from on high to create these crazy technical platforms.
Exactly.
So you went through the process of getting the certification, but what was your main driver or motivation behind getting it?
Yeah, that's, it's really was just to prove I could. I know that sounds like a bad reason, but
no, that's a great reason.
Because I did my, VCP like 2011, and then I completed my advanced professional, the VCAP certifications, and probably I did one in 2012, and I did like 3 of them in 2013. So I ended up having like just a bunch of certifications. Like the one thing I don't have is like the top tier certification. Maybe I should do this. So for me, I kind of considered it the last checkbox in my virtualization career before I fully immersed myself into something else.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of the, why did you climb that mountain? Because it was there. I mean, I think that's a totally valid reason. It's
yeah, I don't know. I like challenges. I'm a competitive kind of person, and so I was like, I just want to do this.
Yeah. That's a good reason. Have you found that now that you have it, it has opened some doors for you? Or are you now like, okay, I'm done with virtualization for now. I'm going to go pursue, like you said, some other area of expertise?
Yeah, I think both. I wouldn't say it necessarily – your life doesn't change, right? If you pass, you get a number. Like things don't just magically change. Like you don't just get invited into the Illuminati, and learn the secret handshake and hang out with Beyonce. Like that doesn't happen, as cool as that would be, but it does, for those people who know what it is, it does kind of lend itself the recognition of, okay, you probably know what you're talking about. So it's particularly helpful when I was consulting. If somebody knew what that is and they brought me in to be like the virtualization architect, that they went, oh, okay, more than likely she knows what's going on, rather than the I'm the expert. You're paying me to be here. Consultant life that you have to always go through to get the customer to really interface with you.
Yeah. I since I'm also in consulting, I found that the credentializing yourself initially makes the conversation a lot easier because then they just trust that you know what you're talking about. And certifications can definitely help with that.
It's kind of feels gross to do it. Where you're like, well, I have this, but at the same time, it does lend itself. It's about appeasing the customer and accomplishing the mission. And if that does it, then I can live with it.
All right. Well, that is good to know. So talking about future virtualization a little bit, vSphere 6.7 got dropped recently. Before we dive into features and stuff, I got to ask, what is going on with their numbering?
So you're referring to the lovely random 6.7.
Yeah. Like they've done 4.0 and 4.1, and they even threw like that 5.5 and 6.5. So it's kind of like, okay, you do 1s and 5s. I get it. Cool. And then suddenly like, nope, 6.7. What do you think of that? So is VMware just messing with everyone?
I think it's definitely a level of master trolling. But, if you look at, other products outside of vSphere, there's not necessarily a specific rhyme or reason, at least to the, in an outward appearance. Like if you look at like Horizon or VRA, and things like that, it's like VRA, 7.3. And same thing with vSAN 6.6, for example. So, but in terms of like the vSphere numbering, I think when you look at what vSphere 6.7 entails, it's a lot of important stuff, but it's more of incremental improvements rather than anything groundbreaking and brand new. So I do think that it safely qualifies as a minor release rather than a major release necessitating calling it 7.0.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as part of this incremental update, one of the things that I know VMware always does is update their configuration maximums. Which you seem to always have to memorize for the VCP exam, which I'm going to have to retake in like 4 months. But I don't find those necessarily all that interesting, but I was wondering, were there any config max updates that came out of the most recent release that you're like, ooh, that's important. Everybody should get excited about that.
No, not particularly. In my experience, a vast majority of customers don't even come close to hitting the maximums.
Yeah.
But I did find the fact that the number of maximum CPUs for a fault tolerance VM increased. And I found that to be interesting, that the team is still kind of chipping away at that feature, even though it's not the most widely used feature. So now it went from 4 vCPUs to 8. So
wow.
That's slow improvement, but,
Yeah, that's
it
no small
It was always
feat.
hard to – no, for them to even make it symmetric multiprocess, that was huge, right?
Yeah.
Multiprocessing, and then they're just slowly chipping away because realistically, it's pretty hard sell to justify using something like fault tolerance when it was limited to 1 vCPU.
Yeah, I have to admit that I've only implemented FT once, and it was for a very specific use case. It was like one component in this big enterprise application that was like a single point of failure. And like, this thing cannot go down. And so we put in all the extra stuff, and it was right when they bumped it from 1 to 4. So like everyone was all excited, oh, we could do 4 now. I was like, okay, yeah, that's great. Well, we'll do it for this one VM and never talk about it again for anything else. But it certainly did the job.
Yeah, I mean, it works. It definitely works.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you have to look at the actual application and its requirements and how do I make this highly available, with what I have available to me. So, using something like a load balancer or something built into the application may be, and likely is a better, option than using something like FT. But FT is there. And so if you have that niche use case, it's perfect for that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened is the app was old, and that's just how they did it. I was like, okay, that's what we're going to do. So there's probably too many features or improvements to go through in a single episode unless we wanted to talk for like a couple hours, which I'm sure you have other things you might want to do. But are there like 3 big improvements or features that you found in the vSphere or vSAN release that you'd want to explore more?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I narrowed it down to 3. You warned me that there was going to be this question, and so I kind of tried to narrow down all of the incremental improvements into 3. So the first one would definitely be more APIs. And I think that's something that vSphere has historically really been lacking. And then they kind of bolted them on. So now we're kind of going back and adding to that and improving them. So this release presents some new APIs that improve, things like the efficiency deployment of vCenter, where you can deploy multiple vCenters with the help of a template, as well as ease of management for vCenter with, backup and restore. There's also, like, for example, the exposed APIs that you can use now to create instant clones, which have historically always been a part of like the Horizon, well, not historically, but since they were released, a part of the Horizon suite.
Sure.
And it's a pretty straightforward process. So I think when you start really digging into the APIs, something like an instant clone, I think people are going to be able to find some really interesting use cases for that API.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, my main ways of interacting with vSphere have always been the for better or worse, the Flash client, or using Power CLI. But you mostly just had to accept the modules that they gave you, and there wasn't really a way to call like REST APIs or anything to a large degree. So it sounds like they've expanded on that to a certain degree, and now you can that's your preferred way to interact, or if you want to string things together, you can use that API. Yeah,
absolutely. And they've been, I think Kyle Ruddy has been doing a great job of trying to evangelize automating things and using APIs, because VMware's definitely it was lacking for a long time, and they've really put a lot of hard work into creating this RESTful API platform that people are able to consume. So I think we'll see more and more documentation use cases around that, of what you can do without having to use the GUI, right?
Right. Yeah, death to the GUI, right?
But I think like that's kind of the second aspect I would say is kind of an important part of this release would be, I would like to think of it as like efficiency at scale. So, things like the HTML5 client, things like the quick boots, per VM EVC, right, for CPU compatibility, and then things like the simplified vCenter topology. So especially when you start thinking about what VMware is trying to do with, like, say, VMware Cloud Foundation and VMware Cloud on AWS, being able to scale, in a massive amount and quickly and easily, right? You've always been able to scale, with VMware, right? And you've been able to scale at mass with VMware for a long time, but it's not always been an easy process. And so I think they're working very diligently to make it a little bit easier for us.
Right. I think you brought up some interesting points there, especially around the API thing, like just for their own internal use, building that HTML5 client, and then any other services that exist in VMware that want to consume vSphere in some way, having that API is huge. But I had read and totally forgot about that per VM EVC, and that makes me think that was probably driven mostly by the VMware on AWS and being able to move a VM that's at a certain EVC level on-prem up to the AWS environment.
Absolutely. I think, you heard me talk about this before. I think hybridity, I think it's going to be an important thing, and I don't think it's necessarily the hybrid cloud that we were sold 5-7 years ago. But I do think that that's going to become increasingly important over the next few years, and being able to do things at a per VM level, like change CPU compatibility, is going to be far more important than being able to do it at a cluster level, which we've done historically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's unpack that hybrid cloud a little bit, because I know I had an idea of what the hybrid cloud was going to be 5 years ago, like you said, and that's not what we ended up with today. So what do you think of or mean when you say hybrid cloud today?
So I think, you're seeing offerings like the, VMware Cloud on AWS and what that entails. And then, obviously the Microsoft one with VMware was announced kind of in a guerrilla style, but that's kind of out there. We haven't yet seen what all this entails, but we do know that it's coming / might exist. And then, of course, things like Azure Stack. So I think we're looking at, it's more of mobility than kind of this idea of, because I don't know, what were you sold with hybrid cloud? Because I was sold the idea of like Cloud A plus Cloud B add together equals hybrid cloud, right? Whatever those A and B are.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessarily what we're seeing today, right? Today is the kind of the idea of like app mobility from on-prem to a public cloud provider, and then even potentially public cloud provider to public cloud provider, and then back on-prem, right? Being able to move basically my application anywhere is kind of what I think about now when I think about hybridity. What about you?
Right. I mean, so I think when when I was first sold the idea, it was more about that being able to deploy your application and then stretch it across multiple clouds. And that whole idea didn't really work out, I think mostly because of data gravity issues. Like if your database is running on-prem and your middle tier is running in Azure and your front end is running in AWS, your application is going to run like poop. It's just, it doesn't work. There's the speed of light and you can't make that any faster. So we dialed that back a little bit. And I think now when I think of hybrid cloud, it's how do I write my application or workload in such a way that it is easily movable as a whole unit from one cloud to another, but it's still going to be that atomic unit as opposed to breaking it into pieces.
I would agree with that. Yeah, that's what I am kind of referring to when I say moving this application. It's all the components. It wouldn't be the front end only.
Right. And for me, the complicated part of that is like AWS and Azure, they have these specialized services that aren't that are very specific to that cloud. So how do you write an application that can take advantage of some of those, but still be very portable? And like, how do you avoid that sort of lock-in? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I think we're being sold that this problem is solved, and I don't really think that it is quite yet, right?
No, but I'm sure VMware and other vendors are hard at work trying to find a way to solve that exact problem.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to like looking at the features that 6.7 brings. Like they seem overall quite minor, but when you start thinking about them in the context in which we're speaking now, I think they start to make a lot more sense.
Right, yeah. When you start looking beyond just your data center and that like scalability, management at scale kind of thing, and especially VMware, if they're going to have to spin up these SDDCs in AWS quickly and automatically and then manage them for clients, that's a whole different ballgame than, just saying, okay, here's the bits, go install it and run it and we'll send you patches.
Absolutely. And, and that actually kind of brings me to like my third important part of vSphere 6.7, and that's security. Especially as now we've kind of established this idea of hybridity and being able to move this application as a unit potentially from one place to another. Well, then it's how do I ensure that data is secured at all times? Mm-hmm. And so I think VMware has made some, minor, but they are incremental security changes that are important. Things like, trusted platform module. We've had this pretty much always when it comes to the hypervisor itself, and securely booting. And now we have virtual TPM. And so it's using that exact same technology, but with the guest operating system that's running in that virtual machine. So again, kind of helping prevent some of that malicious tampering with the virtual machines and its data.
Right, yeah. I'm extending that sort of physical resource up to the virtual machine. And I think there was some advancements around encryption. That probably leads us down the storage path a little bit with the release of vSAN 6.7. But I know they've been making a lot of strides towards making sure that the data is encrypted in transit and at rest on whatever data store it's sitting on.
Yeah. And so, historically, when you look at like a technology like vMotion, and we're talking about like migrating a VM and its state from one ESXi host to another, historically, when you look back at like vSphere 5.0 and, earlier, it was clear text, right? But again, the idea was this is a layer 2 only network. This is on premises. This is going to be hardened in all these different ways. But now when we kind of fast forward to this hybridity idea, we're potentially moving this data across private, and public environments. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes a little bit, not even a little bit, a lot scarier. Yeah. When we think about potentially using something like vMotion across vCenter instances, even like potentially from my on-premises data center into, VMware Cloud on AWS. So VMware as of 6.7 does have that encrypted vMotion for those use cases.
Wow. So yeah, when you move it to the AWS or if the Azure thing exists at some point, that's such a weird announcement. Yeah, having it encrypted the whole time. That whole announcement with the Azure thing, I'm just like, it sticks in my brain because they announced it and then VMware's like, say, what? You can, okay, we're not on board with that. And then they were like, okay, well, maybe we'll support that. And then Microsoft had a big webinar where they were supposed to talk about it. And I got on that webinar, and all they talked about was all the other Azure migration features. And they're like, oh, yeah, this VMware thing's coming. We'll talk about it later. And that was like 3 months ago. They haven't mentioned it since. Yeah,
I definitely think the whole thing was interesting I would like to use the word suspect, but without using that in an accusatory tone. But just kind of an interesting thing, and I think they kind of put to the brilliance in a way of Microsoft. They really put VMware between a rock and a hard place because there probably is a very specific agreement. I mean, I don't know. I'm speculating between VMware and AWS as to this offering that they've created together. And I would imagine that probably excludes working with other people. But then when the announcement with Microsoft, it was like, wasn't the wording something like that this is an offering developed with partners? Like it wasn't necessarily, they kind of put the onus back on partners. And so that's where it puts VMware in this hard place because VMware can't necessarily say that they don't support it if they're supporting their partners and it's supported vSphere versions, and NSX versions and, whatever products they're using. Mm-hmm. So it becomes kind of a political game that I am glad that I'm not particularly involved with.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be on the product team for either of those sides and arguing that out with the marketing people. Be like, oh, whoops. Well, I guess we have to sort of support it, but we have to also be careful about not saying we full support it.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, but I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, me too. So getting back to storage a little bit, so I know vSAN 6.7 dropped, and overall it seems like all the big advancements mostly came in that. So do you agree with that? And what do you think are the big advancements on the vSAN side?
Well, I definitely agree that it's a bit storage focused. And I almost purposely didn't mention storage at all in my kind of three things that I was looking at with 6.7. But I do agree because when you look at the laundry list of features added and improvements made, storage by far is the longest list. And I think it makes a lot of sense because VMware really is pushing, VMware Cloud Foundation. Like I just got off a meeting this morning about VMware Cloud Foundation and, of course, VMware Cloud on AWS. And both of these are effectively leveraging a modified but still fairly standard VMware SDDC stack. Mm-hmm. And that consists of VMware, vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. And so because vSAN becomes kind of the cornerstone storage platform for this, it becomes increasingly important for VMware to then consistently improve, the performance and usability of something like vSAN.
Right. And if I remember correctly, when I was looking at the earnings for VMware, like vSAN outstripped the growth of everything else by like 4 or 5x easily. So it's definitely a very popular product for them.
It's been a very interesting ride with vSAN, because when I remember, what was it called? In 5.x, they had released something called, it was like before vSAN, and it was some kind of, VSA, right? It was like the vSphere storage appliance.
I remember the VSA, yeah.
Yeah, and it was for like 2 and 3 node clusters only. And this was, obviously vSAN had to have been in development at this point because vSAN came out in 5.5. This was a 5.0 brand new thing, VSA. And it was this like virtual appliance running on an ESXi host to aggregate disks. And it was very, very limited. And it was pretty, crappy. So it was really interesting because then when they announced vSAN and vSphere 5.5, I remember kind of thinking, yeah, okay, we'll see, right? Like we'll see if this, kind of being a bit, negative about it, but it's been a good ride. It's been a good ride for them, and I think there's a lot of smart people in that business unit doing some really good work.
Yeah, I do remember the VSA product because I deployed, I want to say, a 2-node cluster of that in. I was working for a university at the time, and they had all these wiring closets throughout campus, and they needed some compute in one of them. And so we set up a 2-node VSA because obviously there was no storage array in there, but they wanted to have virtualization, so that's what we did, and it worked. It needed a little care and feeding, but it definitely worked, and that was like 5.0, 5.1. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense for robo type, or edge type use cases, but I think realistically, when you look at usability and performance, it could have been a lot better than what it was. And I think we saw that kind of evolve. And vSAN kind of learned, I think, a lot of lessons from the VSA because it died, right? Within like 2 versions, they killed it off.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't remember seeing anything about it after 5.5.
Yep.
I feel like every release of vSphere, the number of systems that cannot or should not be virtualized gets smaller, but there's always some weird edge case. Speaking of edge cases. So Does 6.7 finally eliminate all the edge cases, or is there always going to be some amount of systems that have to be physical?
That's a great question. And this is something that I feel like I talked a lot about when I was on the consulting side. I think conceptually all, or at least a vast majority of workloads can be virtualized, but that doesn't necessarily always mean you should, right? Because when you start looking at an application, and let's say that this application is requiring all of the maximums that we were kind of talking about earlier, maximum CPU, and let's say it needs like 6 terabytes of RAM. So you start looking at that and going, okay, well, what does one ESXi host even have? Does it make sense? Like, can I virtualize it? Yes. Can I virtualize it and it run well? Yes. But at what point am I losing money? Am I not getting an ROI on actually virtualizing this? Because when you start thinking about the CPU scheduler, does it make sense to put other workloads on the same ESXi host as this monster VM, right? Or even potentially in the same cluster as this monster VM. So when you start factoring in that sort of idea, you start going, it may not actually be worth it. Not that you couldn't, but it may not be worth it. But I think, when you look at virtualization or really anything, so for example, public cloud, I think it's important to take it, whatever it is, first approach. So for example, take a cloud first approach. So while not everything will fit, or work well in the cloud, but having that cloud first mentality will influence your architectural decisions and your cultural decisions as you implement whatever this new technology is. So I think it's important to virtualize it first, for example, but then maybe we look at it and go, maybe this isn't the best use case. Maybe this isn't exactly right. It doesn't necessarily make sense. We're not we're not saving any money doing it. Maybe it should be a physical machine.
Right, yeah. And just, like you said, start with that assumption we should virtualize, and then explain to me why that's a bad idea. I like that you tied that into the cloud too, because we deal with a lot of clients that are gaining that cloud first mentality, and it's made conversations a little bit easier. So we can still point out scenarios where it doesn't make sense to use public cloud or use PaaS versus IaaS, but those situations are getting smaller, and they're open to the conversation about moving everything to the cloud first and then tell me why I need to keep something on-prem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're always going to have that conversation regardless of what technology we're moving to. I'd love to say that everything belongs on public cloud or everything belongs, on a ESXi host, but realistically that's just not true.
Right. The other case that I think of is container hosts. Sort of the philosophy, do you use a VM as a container host for your container deployments, or do you go with bare metal to reduce the layers of abstraction and maybe gain some performance improvements? So do you have any thoughts or opinions on which approach makes more sense?
I think it's more than just performance improvements, though. I mean, you have to start thinking about depending on what this is, security is a huge aspect, at least with a lot of the customers that I work with. And so we go, what's more important to you, performance or security, right? We have to, and maybe that comes from my DoD background as well, but that tends to be a conversation. We go, what's more important to you, security or availability? Because when you start looking at the qualities of a design, it's ideal to, put all of them as number one, but realistically, there's going to be something that's more important to you than another, and we tend to prioritize that. And sometimes they are kind of contradictive, right? Where if I choose to make everything like what we were talking about earlier with security and the gold disk, if I say security is the most important thing to me, I must harden this as hardened as it can be, well, then realistically, things like performance are going to suffer. So I think it really just depends on what aspect of the design is the most important to you.
Okay, yeah, that's sort of CAP theorem applied to I guess virtualization in this particular case.
Yeah.
Getting towards the end, it seems like there's a perception of VMware that it's sort of the old man in the corner and not the nimble unicorn gallivanting around the halls of IT. So, do you think that's just part of the natural life cycle for technology and companies? And does VMware need to do anything to stay relevant, or can they just kind of stay the course at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because, and I'm going to ask kind of a question back to you. So stay relevant in the eyes of whom? Because at the end of the day, VMware is beholden only to its shareholders, right?
True.
So therefore, as long as that company is remaining profitable, then it's relevant, regardless of how you or I feel about it.
Right. Well, I feel to a certain degree, mind share and perception in the IT community also influences that share price. even though maybe it shouldn't necessarily. So, I mean, obviously the revenue numbers can look great, but if there's a perception that things are on the downslope for a company, even if the numbers don't show that yet, then that can negatively impact the share price, right?
I agree, and I think VMware's always really benefited by having a very rabid and interactive community. But when you look at like vSphere 6.7, we just kind of laundry listed a ton of new features, or changes, and there's still a million blog posts that came out about it, and I'm guilty of writing one. And there's still this fanfare about it, even though realistically, it's probably the most boring release I've seen of vSphere ever. But, I think, I agree with you about perception. In the scheme of things, VMware administrator skills, they're really table stakes at this point. Mm-hmm. Am I going to hire somebody that doesn't have them? Right? At least a fundamental understanding of what virtualization is and what it can do, and, can get around in vSphere and do things. I'm probably not. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of it. So when you start thinking about going, okay, well, vSphere is effectively table stakes at this point, naturally releases aren't going to be as sexy or as exciting, but it's going to be more about incrementally improving the product. So I do think that is a kind of natural life cycle. And I think we can apply that to, more than just virtualization. Like, when was the last time you were blown away by like a new Nexus OS version?
I'm going to go with never. But
exactly. You go, okay, great. This incremental change is there. I needed that. Now it's there, but I'm not going to like write home about it. But until VMware dies, there will always be a need for somebody who's extremely technical, some kind of like expert level engineer architect, especially when you look at like the breadth of offerings that VMware has. So when you start thinking about service portals like vRealize Automation or vCloud Director, that's a whole different beast, and that requires a whole different and very special set of skills and expertise.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's really relevant or resonated with me from that was you said it's kind of a boring release, right? But boring means stable, usually. Yes. and enterprises value stability over being the cool, sexy new thing most of the time, right? I think about what happened with OpenStack and how that was like the new cool thing on the block for a while, and then they disappeared, and then containers and Kubernetes is now like kind of the new hot thing, but then that star will fade as well, and I don't know what the next cool, awesome thing is. I mean, do you have a prognostication about that?
Not yet. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's kind of this natural cycle, but I don't know if I have. I can't look into my crystal ball quite yet and determine what's coming.
Right. It's going to be something quantum. I feel like quantum's got to be in the name somewhere, right? Everybody loves quantum things. Yeah,
and I think we talk about IoT a lot, right? And it was a big thing at VMworld last year, and like this week I'm in Vegas at Interop, and you've got Interop happening in Dell Technologies World. So we're talking so much about IoT. So I think we're going to see more and more of that over the next 2-3 years of like, I can now have a smart everything. Everything is wired, everything is wireless, everything is, but then we're going to realize like, wow, that's going to be that's so painful to manage. So do we want that in certain aspects? Yes. Is that going to make life for a lot of companies dramatically better? Yes, but that's not going to be something that every single enterprise or every single company is going to adopt. So I think we're going to see something like IoT continue to grow, and then it's going to drop off. It's going to become not sexy because it's not the cool new thing, but it will be relevant to a lot of businesses, but not to everybody. Just like containers, just like, whatever else came before it.
Right. There's probably some sort of slope you could draw of hot new awesomeness down into I know there's like the trough of disillusionment, but then there's the product maturity life cycle. Somewhere in there is like the balance of relevance, just floating along in the stream, right?
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. Like stability becomes increasingly important to company, enterprises, or like I've been working a lot lately with like MSPs. MSPs would love to adopt every brand new technology, but realistically, they are offering a service to many, many companies. So they can't just go buy the new hottest, whatever software until it's proven that it can be stable and it can provide the needs to the hundreds of customers that MSP has.
Well, I think that's about all the questions I have for you, except for my very last and favorite one. What is your favorite 80s movie?
Oof. I feel like no matter what I answer here, I'm going to let my sister down. I would have to say anything, actually. That's pretty cliche, but
No, not. I don't think I've actually gotten that answer before. So
Yeah.
that's a great movie. That was John Cusack, right?
Yeah, that's when you were like, "Dang, is John Cusack hot?" And then you're like, "Actually, no." But that was that moment.
But he manages to achieve it just in that one moment, right?
Well, he's like the brooding, mysterious, fitting all the cliches of what you want in a rom-com.
Right, absolutely. Well, Rebecca Fitzhugh, thank you so much for joining the Anexipod. If people want to know more about you and what you're up to, is there anywhere they can follow you online?
Absolutely. So on Twitter at Rebecca Fitzhugh. I'll let you use your imagination on the spelling there. And then, of course, on my blog, technicloud.com.
Okay, and I will absolutely include that in the show notes. And that's our show, Rebecca Fitzhugh. Thank you again.
Thank you for your time.
And that was our show with Rebecca Fitzhugh. Thanks to the marketing team for helping me pull this together. Thanks to Anexinet for helping me produce this podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital transformation, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet and see how they can help. If you've enjoyed this episode of Anexipod, why not leave a nice review on iTunes? If you're looking for more content, you can check out our sister podcast, Buffer Overflow. On the show, I am joined weekly by my co-host Chris Hayner to discuss what's new and interesting in the IT news sphere. You can find out more about me and what I am up to on Twitter at Ned1313 or on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.